Liselle Sambury, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing and traditional publishing. And today I am talking about writing a He-Man book and really kind of at a higher level the process of working on IP. So if you haven't heard of this before, IP stands for intellectual property. So when I write my own original books, that idea is my intellectual property. And this is really referring to the intellectual property of others. So like a publisher has come up with an idea on their own and they hire a writer to write it, or in this case, there is an existing IP, which is He-Man, and they hire authors to write the books for it. And so that is the case for this. So I was hired to write the third book in the Tales of Eternia series. So this is the first book in the series, The Hunt for Mossman, and this is the second book in the series, I, Skeletor, both written by Gregory Moan, who is wonderful. And so I wrote the third book, and that'll be coming out June 6th of this year. So I will have links in the description if you are interested in pre-ordering and checking it out. So really in this video, what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about the kind of writing process, like coming up with ideas and like working within an IP framework and drafting and editing and like would I do IP again and who do I think IP is good for. That's what this video is. But if you are interested in first figuring out like how I got this opportunity and how this all came about and how this started and like how you might get opportunities in IP, I have a separate video in which I talk about kind of getting this book deal where I discuss all of that. So I will also have that linked in the description if you want to check this out. But this video is going to be more the kind of writing and editing process down the line to the finished book. So let's go ahead and get started. First, let's start with the initial research phase. So part of this is a little bit of that like initial agreeing to do this because I had decided to watch the He-Man and the Masters of the Universe show. This is the newest show on Netflix that's like focused more towards a middle grade audience because there are like multiple He-Man shows, and so that's the one that I was specifically talking about. So I wanted to watch the show before agreeing to see if I actually liked it and really wanted to write this. And so I discovered very quickly that I really liked the show. And so right at that point I started thinking of ideas of what I might want to write and what story I might want to write, because I also kind of wanted to have an idea of what I was going to actually do before I agreed to it, because I feel like if I watched and my head was completely empty and I had zero ideas, I would have felt really nervous about agreeing to do it. And so I was jotting down and like thinking of ideas, which was great because then I was kind of already generating some things that I had to work with. And I knew that the way these kind of books and stories went is that they're like kind of like side quest stories. So they're things that happen at different points in the series that you wouldn't have seen in the main series, but they kind of happened off stage, if you will. So I was also kind of thinking about when I would like to place that in time. And then once everything had been agreed with and we were like, yeah, we're on board, and I had signed all my contract stuff and my NDA stuff and all of that sort of thing, then I had been given access to the next couple seasons of episodes and scripts. And so then I was like, okay, I've got to watch all of these now because my ideas might change, and like depending on where in the series the book ends up being set, you know, an idea that I thought of earlier might not be relevant. They might want me to set it later in the series or earlier in the series. I really didn't know yet. But I watched the rest of the episodes, the next 2 seasons of episodes, and then I also added that on to my brainstorming and kind of was trying to think of different ideas that could work at kind of different points in time and just kind of give myself a good basis for what could I do for this and like what is a possibility and what could be stories that I'd be really interested in telling that I think people would be interested to read. once I was done with that initial research phase, then I was like, okay, I want to create some pitches. So I wanted to solidify my loose brainstorming ideas into like actual ideas and get them into a pitch format. These were very loose pitch formats, so like it was just like a couple sentences each, just something like elevator pitch, like quick and easy, that I could be like, hey, I'm thinking of this, or hey, I'm thinking of this. And because I knew that I had an upcoming meeting with Mattel, who are the owners of the He-Man property, and with Abrams, who are the publisher, I was like, okay, I want to get some pitches ready and done so that when I have this meeting, I can show them that I have these pitches ahead of time and kind of get their feelings and feedback. And so I decided to do 3 pitches, mostly because I didn't have like so many ideas that I was going to do so many pitches, and 3 always seems like a very good number of stuff. Like 2 feels a little too narrow, but 3 I feel like feels like, yeah, you know, this is good, and this is so completely arbitrary, but that was how I felt. And so I decided to put together 3 loose pitches. I can no longer remember what the 3rd pitch is, and I can't find it, but I knew one was the pitch we went with, which was like Teela going to this alternate universe where He-Man and all the masters of the universe are like opposite in their personalities. And so I thought that would be a really fun idea, and that was the one we ended up going with. And then there was a second idea, which was like more of like a witch competition between Teela and Evelyn/Evelyn, and it was going to be like them competing together to do something, question mark. This is what I mean when I say they were very loose pitches. Like, I did not have like super solid ideas for this. I just kind of wanted something general that I could be like, hey, what about this? Because I knew I'd probably have to do a more intense sort of proposal or synopsis or something to show them later on. And so I just kind of wanted to get a feel of that initial idea so that I wasn't running off and like doing all this work only for them to be like, oh, that's a terrible idea, we hate that. So that was what I had done, and I narrowed it down to those 3 pitches. And then the day of the meeting came. So I knew there was going to be a meeting upcoming, which is why I had prepared those pitches. And so this first meeting was really like me and the publisher. And so it was, you know, my editor and the editorial assistant that was working on the project and my agent, and then Gregory Moan, who is the author who wrote the first 2 He-Man books in the series, and like who I consider to be very much a He-Man expert. So the meeting was with them. And then I found out very quickly that no one had expected me to create pitches. Not only had no one expected me to create pitches, no one had expected I would have watched the 2 seasons that they sent me already. This meeting was really just for me to meet everyone and kind of like say hi. But because I'm an A-type person, I was like, why would we have a meeting if not to solidify the ideas and like get to business and get to work? And that was very much not the point of it. It was really just to like meet each other and to have Greg talk more about like his experience working on the projects and like working with the team and doing IP and like just kind of essentially to like help me become comfortable with the whole situation and to be like, you know, we're behind you on all of this, and like this is how the process works, and like this is how my editor and Gregory work together, and so this is how we could work together. It was really a super high level, just like, we want to make sure you're comfortable and everything is good and you know what's happening. Which is great, and I really appreciate it. I just thought it was really funny in hindsight that they were like, wait, because I was like, okay, I have 3 pitches, and they were like, oh, okay. So I just thought that was funny, but that's me being extremely A-type. No one told me to prepare pitches. No one said to do any of this. I just like decided to do this on my own because I'm that type of person. But anyway, I found it helpful because then I got all of the stuff that the meeting was for, and then I also got to present my pitches. And it was great because I got feedback from them, and they had suggested picking 2 out of the 3 and fleshing them out a little bit more and presenting that to the Mattel team when we had our Mattel team meeting, which was going to happen down the line separate from this meeting. And I was like, okay, that's 100% something that I can do. And so that was that meeting. And then I had a debrief with my agent, because anytime me and my agent have a meeting with anyone, we almost always have like a debrief after the fact, so that my agent can be like, okay, like, are you really good? Is everything really fine? Because sometimes you might have an experience with a publisher where like you don't really want to say something in front of them, or like maybe you had a question, but for whatever reason you like felt too embarrassed or weird to ask about it, or maybe you didn't think it was the right time, or right after you like suddenly thought of a concern that you wanted to address. Then like when me and my agent have that debriefing, we can talk about that all together. Or sometimes I just have questions that are like very specific to the agenting part and like that sort of relationship, and not really so relevant to the publisher side. And so I don't want to take up time in the publisher meeting to ask my agent the agent specific question. And so we have those debriefs after, and then I can like share all that with her. But yeah, everything was good. I was very happy, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna get my pitches ready and then we can go on to the next meeting. After that, kind of, I feel like I can't even remember how long it was, like a couple weeks or a month or so, I truly cannot remember, later is when we had the Mattel meeting. So that was great. And so that was with like me and my agent and my editor, and then the Mattel team that were, you know, involved in this project and involved in the show. And so we came on there and I pitched the 2 ideas. Those ideas, like those pitches that I'd created, the longer form ones, were sent to them ahead of time so that they were able to read it ahead of time. But I guess just like, you know, it's different when people talk about something than when you read it on paper. And so they just kind of wanted to hear more about the ideas and the pitches. And so I pitched the idea again. And they very like quickly off the bat were much more interested in that first one, which is the one we went with about that opposite dimension, which is great because that was my favorite idea. And so I was really happy that they wanted to go with it, which is why I put it first on the pitch list, because I was like, this is my favorite one. But I would have been okay with the other one too. But very quickly they really liked that one. And then, which unexpectedly, but was honestly really helpful, is they started talking about things that they wanted to see in the book, which, you know, I haven't done IP before, so I really had no idea how this process would go. And I'm sure it's different with all sorts of different IP holders, if you will. They had a character that they wanted to see in the book, and so they talked about that, and I was like, okay, that actually works really well, because I was already going to do a sort of mentor-like character for Tila, and this character actually fits in really well with that. There were also a few very specific things that they wanted to happen in the story, and so they let me know that. And it's really funny because when I was listening to all of this and I was writing stuff down, it was slotting so perfectly into what I had already had planned. And so that worked out really, really well. Because I think like at first when they started talking about like specific things to put in, I was like, oh, okay, I gotta like figure out where to put these in. But everything that came up, I was like, oh, I put that here, and I put that here, and I put that there. And I think it was really helpful because it's not like I had the whole thing plotted out. I just had these kind of major beats, and so I was just kind of slotting in what would happen in there. And so I found that to be something that was really helpful, to not have so much of like a solid idea going into it, because then it was easier to pull into that collaborative aspect. So that worked out really well, because honestly everything I was like, yeah, no, this will work. And then I started talking with them about like how I could put it in and how I could incorporate that stuff and how that would all work together. And so that was really great. And so that was pretty much the whole thing of the meeting. I also learned a bunch of like cool He-Man facts and secrets that obviously I cannot tell anyone, but it was really cool like to hear more about the property, because prior to writing the book I knew about He-Man, but it wasn't something that I was like super familiar with. And so it was really interesting and fun to hear all those things, especially since I had watched the episodes that hadn't been released yet, and I was like, oh, this is like really cool, like I can't wait to see this happen in the series. So that was really a positive meeting. And then after that meeting, I had a debrief with the Mattel team, not the Mattel team, with the Abrams team, which is the same thing as like my agent debrief. It was just to like check in and be like, are you okay with everything? Does everything look good for you? Do you have any questions specifically for us as your publisher on the publisher side? That sort of thing. And then I had another debrief after that with my agent to check in on me about like everything, which honestly I really appreciate all of that, because I think in this industry, in publishing, like I find that it's really important to feel like the people at all stages like have your back and are like looking out for your best interests and are like checking in with you and making sure that you are comfortable with what's going on and like how your story is going to work and come together and like how you work and all of that. So I really appreciated all of that, and I thought that was really positive, and that's something I've always appreciated with my own agent, is that I always feel very solidly that she has my back and she's working in my best interests, and I just think that's really important. So I appreciated all of the debrief moments, but that was pretty much like at that point it was like, okay, now we know what you're gonna do, and Mattel said they'd send me some follow-up information. So they sent me like this really cool, it's like a heroes and villains like guidebook. It's really cool and it's super helpful, and I used it like the whole time that I was working on the book. And then also some additional information about the character that they wanted me to put in the book, and so that was kind of all gonna come down the line, and at that point for me the next step was like putting together a synopsis. So to put together my synopsis, what I did is that I went into Plotter, which is a program that I use to plot out books, and I plotted out the entire thing in there. It wasn't as like intense as like when I do use Plotter for my young adult projects, partially because this book I had a strict word count limit of 35,000 words, and so I wasn't gonna have a ton of things in a 35,000 word book, which is about like, I'm trying to think of page count wise, like 120, 130-ish pages, like around that amount. So I didn't want to like put in too much stuff and end up with a book that was way too long, because I knew that was going to make things very difficult for me in my life. And if you know me as an author, I love a thick book, but I was like, I have a very strict word count and I need to stick to it because there's no other, like it's not going to increase. So I really need to make this work. And so I went on Plotter and I kind of decided that I was going to do 1,000-word chapters, because what I wanted to create was I wanted to create a book that was going to be really like fast paced and like a fun, quick read for kids, because it is for a middle grade audience. And so I wanted something that like got them turning pages and that sort of thing, especially because the show is like so action packed and exciting. And I wanted to be able to bring that into the book form and like have something that was very much a page turner. And so I decided on those shorter chapters, because when you have shorter chapters, I find that you get more of that like page turning situation, and like tried to put in a lot of action things and like twists and turns and that sort of stuff. So that was kind of me plotting all of that out. My biggest struggle when plotting this is that I had been asked to put that character in, but that character hadn't appeared on the show. And so I was like, the other characters in the show, I was like, I can pull their personalities and like how they are and how they act from the show, but this character hadn't appeared in the show. So then I was like, okay, how am I going to do this? And so I ended up looking into older He-Man episodes, because in the original series that character was in it. Zodak is the character's name. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go in there and like see from like the original series and like kind of discern a personality from that. And then I can take it into this, but like with the tone of this specific Netflix series, and also with the information they had given me about the character. And so I kind of like Frankensteined that all together into creating this character that I put into the book. But that was the most difficult part about it, because I was like, I don't really know this character the way that I feel like I knew all the other characters and knew Tila, because I had watched the show and really soaked it in that way. So that was a bit of a struggle for me with plotting, but I was able to work it out with all of that information. And so that ended up being fine. And then I put that all together in a synopsis. Once I'd had it all plotted out in Plotter, so I had all my chapters and everything, like I could have started drafting right from that, but I didn't because things might have changed. And so I just created the synopsis, a 3 to 4 page synopsis that I put together, and I sent that off to my editor. And I was wonderfully surprised when my editor was basically like, no notes, looks great. I was like, this has never happened to me. This has never happened. I've never said anything and been like, oh yeah, no, that's perfect. So that was great. And so we sent that off to Mattel. And then they had, I believe, a couple little tweaks, which was like very easy to do. And so had everything ready to go, and so I was ready to draft. And the only thing that had come up that was a little bit of a like is my editor was kind of concerned about the length given all the things kind of going on, but I felt like it was gonna be okay because I had planned them out, each chapter to be 1,000 words, and I was like, I think I'm actually gonna be okay. But if not, there was a specific section where I thought I could probably cut from that if needed, because it was really just kind of like a fun back and forth, but there could have been less back and forth in the fun back and forth, if that makes sense. So that was something I was like, okay, I could cut that if needed, but I was like, okay, going into this, I'm going to be very cognizant of this word count because I know this is a very strict word count. And after all of that, it was time to draft. So I could do my first draft of the project, which I did my usual drafting style in that I pretty much set myself, this is how many days I have to work on the project, and like this is the minimum amount of words I have to write each day in order to like reach my deadline and do what I need to do. So I set that all out, giving myself time to also do a self-edit on the book, because that's kind of also how I work within my deadlines. I don't want to just have time for the first draft. I want to have time for the first draft, and I want to have time to read over everything and like do a self-edit so that I'm never sending anyone a first draft, which you can and people do, and it's totally fine. It's my preference to not send a first draft to anyone, because then I know that I'm going to get feedback to fix things that I probably would have just fixed in a self-edit myself. When I send it off to people, I want to get edits for things that I wouldn't have seen to fix myself, if that makes sense. So I did my normal drafting process, and that went like smoothly. And the drafting process had a lot of like on the fly research. So I was very much utilizing the He-Man wiki, the fan wiki going on there, and like double checking things and like deciding on kind of settings. I also used YouTube a lot to watch like old original He-Man episodes, because sometimes I wanted to use a setting and it hadn't shown up in the new series, but it was in the original He-Man series or like a different He-Man series that had popped up. And so I'd go try and find episodes so that I could see what the setting looked like and like see how everything was laid out and like any special features of the setting, because it says it in the wiki, but I wanted to like see it in the show. And so using some of that, I also used that guidebook that they gave me. I also asked for more information about that new character as well, so I could put that in. I even watched some like toy reviews because I wanted to see the different iterations of like colors and layouts of something that might have existed in the show. And sometimes they like will do something different for the toy and they'll switch it up a bit. And so I wanted to see those. Also because, I put in the sky sleds, which is like a flying motorcycle essentially. And I had looked at a toy review because I wanted to see the different angles of it, because in the show I really could only kind of see one angle and I wanted to see what it looked like from all sides. So I ended up watching a toy review so I could see what it looked like when they moved it around. So there was that, and I also did utilize Gregory Moan, who wrote the first two He-Man books, to like ask him questions about things and to like get his opinion, which he like was very gracious in offering and like giving me like that support and assistance, which he didn't have to do. And so I was really appreciative of that, and that was really helpful because like I had this thing, I had also read the He-Man book that was out at the time, which was the first book, to also get a sense of like how the other books in the series were going and like how that was working out. And so, yeah, I noticed that like he had like a big Skeletor battle at the end. And all, you know, in the episodes, there's a lot of the time like a big Skeletor battle. And I didn't have that in my book as of yet. And I was like, I kind of feel like I should add in a big Skeletor battle. And so I had gotten his opinion on that, and he was like, yeah, I mean, fans are going to be excited about a big Skeletor battle. And so I put that in there. And so these were like, so it was like I was drafting and I was doing my regular drafting process, but I was also doing a lot of this like ad hoc sort of research as things came up, which is actually something I do in my regular drafting process also. You know, I have a small amount of like initial research, and then I'll do a lot of things as it comes up. So actually not that different from my regular drafting process, but I had done that. And so I finished the first draft, and then I did a self-edit just to, you know, tweak things and like shift things around and like make sure I had something that I was really happy and felt solid about. And then I sent that off to to my editor. My God. And now I want to talk about the editing process in general of working on this project. So once I had sent off my second draft of the book, then I first got feedback from my editor about it, and so we had done some edits there. Mostly like the big edit was that it was too long. So I didn't realize, like I was like, oh, I'm under 35,000, but it just the way that things were laid out, it actually needed to be less of that because there's some material at the front of the book that takes up word count that I hadn't, incorporated, that I hadn't considered when I was calculating my own word count. And so I was kind of like 2,000 words over. And so I ended up cutting a couple chapters. It was those couple chapters that I thought, oh, if I need to, I can cut these from the beginning. And so it was actually like a very simple process to just cut those, because I knew right off the bat that those were two that could be cut. That isn't to say that I wrote them in and they were extra and they weren't necessary. It was just like, it was like a fun back and forth sort of thing, which I know is exactly how I described it before, but it was just like a fun time. It was like an entertaining part of the book. And like, it was part of a bigger entertaining part that was more plot driven. And this was like the entertaining part that like didn't really have a lot of plot focus, but it was still entertaining and helpful to the story. And so I cut that out, and so all the entertainment was plot focused from that point on. So we did that, and then we handed that over to Mattel to get their feedback from it, and that was where a lot of the like technical feedback about the world had come in, and like, this is called this isn't called that, and that sort of thing. And that honestly made me feel really happy and comfortable because I think in writing IP and like working on something that like has an existing, you know, IP and has an existing fandom, I really wanted to make sure I was getting things right, and that I wasn't going to put in something where fans were going to be like, what? But I'm not an expert. I'm not like a super expert or anything like that. And so I was really doing my best. So it was really helpful from their end to get those corrections so that I could be like, okay, I can know that like things are going to be correct. And it actually wasn't that many. But it was also interesting from like a first time working on IP perspective, because I didn't really know the boundaries of like what I could shift in the world and like what I could get away with kind of creative freedom wise, and like what I could not potentially. And so it was really interesting to see that, as well as like what in the story was like, yeah, no, we can do that, and like that can be incorporated into it. And like, I guess become canon, which is really fun to think about, like adding to that property and like writing in something and like now it's canon. So that was really cool. But like there were some things where it was like, no, not gonna fly. Like I think I had some snake men and I made them fly and it was like, no, snake men don't fly. It's not gonna happen. We're not gonna do it. And I was like, okay, cool. But that was one of those things where like I hadn't seen them fly, but I thought, could they? And so I wrote it in. And so that was something that was like, no, they're not going to do that. And I was like, noted. So that was a really also like fun part of that IP process, just kind of seeing how much you can kind of like, you know, within, not like I was just changing things willy-nilly for the sake of it, but it was interesting to see kind of the different levels of like how much you can kind of put into the IP and like how much is like, no, this is like a very strict parameter of the IP. So I thought that was interesting, but that was really it. And it also, what I thought was great is that Mattel gave some great suggestions for like adding additional things. So like some additional stuff in the show, like what if we did, they're in this setting, all these other things could happen. What if we like made one of these things happen or made one of these things happen to like bring out the setting more and bring out more of that world. And then I could do that as well. So those were really great suggestions too. So it wasn't just like editing and like fixing things, it was also like making suggestions for bringing more of the story and more of the IP to life. So that was really great. And then I finished all those up and then it was kind of like line edits and copy edits. And then it was really on to the finalization steps of the book. So things like the cover. So we discussed, you know, who should be on the cover and like who should be put on there. And so we had a conversation about that and that was decided. I will show the cover again here. It's a beautiful cover. I love all of the He-Man covers. I think they're so cool. I think they're amazing. I really love them. And so I was just excited to see the cover. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna love any cover that shows up. But that was like the depth of my involvement really in the cover, was kind of like, what's the title of the book? And we decided on that. And then who do we think should be on the cover? That sort of thing. And so that was really like the whole process of the cover there. And then I also did past pages. So that's kind of when you see it in a digital format where the book is all put together, kind of how it's going to look. Well, not kind of, but like how it's actually going to look when it's printed. And so I'd gone through that and I had a lot of opportunities to go through that. I remember at one point I was like, how many past pages are we gonna do? Because usually I do 1 or 2 rounds of it. And so I was surprised to like keep getting it. But then it had turned out that they just wanted to make sure that I had had as many opportunities as possible to like be comfortable with what was gonna be the final print and to be happy with everything that was happening. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's perfect. I am fine. We can move on from this. But I really appreciated how important it was to them that like I'd be really happy with this final product and that I get the opportunity to be involved in that way and to make those changes and to be a really big part of that process so that the final product that comes out is something that is exactly what I wanted and something that I'm really proud of. Which of course I'm really proud of the project and I'm excited for it to come out. So that was really great. And that was basically kind of like the finalization of all of that. I have not talked about marketing in this because that hasn't really been a part of this process for me. We haven't really discussed marketing in any way. If that changes, I will probably talk about it in a later video. I was thinking about doing a video talking about marketing, like my original work versus IP work versus anthologies. So if that ends up becoming a part of this, then I'll put that together in that video. And if it doesn't, then I'll just do a video that's like anthology marketing versus my original work marketing. So but up until this point, it hasn't really been like an active conversation. So yeah, that's really kind of all of the book process. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the adjacent IP things. How was this experience overall for me? I had a really positive experience doing this. It was great. I felt really supported by all the teams that I was working with. I felt like I was getting to write a fun story that I really liked and that I thought was really cool. And so I just had like a great time with that. And I personally, like when I was younger, I read a ton of fan fiction. Like I read a lot of fan fiction. I like didn't read nearly as many books as I read fan fiction, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words of fan fiction, but I'd never written any because I think it was just, I don't know why, because I wrote like original stories, but I just never wrote fan fiction. And so this was also really fun because I was like, I'm like writing fan fiction, but like canon fan fiction. So I thought that was just like a really fun time. And I really got to see like the fun of that and like appreciating that because it was cool because I felt like I really had a good handle on the characters and I really knew them from the show. And so this was just kind of like taking what they already were and like telling a different sort of story or like side quest, but still kind of getting to the heart of their character and like who they're supposed to be. And I thought it was interesting to get to work with that, with something that's already there, and kind of carve out this story and journey as opposed to my own original work, which I'm working with a completely blank slate and I make it whatever I want to make it. So that was fun. And also like translating the character personalities like to the page and also the tone of the show, because something I really love about the show is that it's got these action-packed sequences, but it's also got some really heartfelt sequences, but also this like great humor tone throughout. And so it was fun to get to like flex those muscles in a book and like do it that way. I just thought that was really cool and that was a really fun time. It was also a great experience for me to do a middle grade book because I've previously only written YA and published YA, and I have written some adult but not published, and so I hadn't previously like written middle grade like that. And so it was really cool also to get to flex those muscles because I do have some like upper middle grade lower YA ideas that I'm interested in exploring, and so it was fun to get to explore and like flex those muscles. And it felt like a really good transition because in the show, like these characters are teenagers, but it's really for like a middle grade audience. So it was like this really cool, interesting blend of like doing that sort of like middle grade feel, but with a YA character. And so it felt kind of like the sweet spot of that upper middle grade, lower YA that I'm interested in. And so it was like getting to do that. And I was like, oh, yay, that's fun because I want to do that in the future. And so it was cool to be able to get this opportunity to do that and try that out and see how that feels to me and see how that style is with my writing and how I like that. And if I feel like I'm successful at doing that as well. So I thought that was really helpful. So overall, it was a great experience for me. Who do I think this sort of IP is good for? I think this is great if you really are like able to be open to this sort of collaboration and like working together with people to come up with stories in this sort of way. I think it's different with different IP. Like some IP, they'll like give you a full outline and then you go and you write based on that outline, whereas in this case it was a little bit more collaborative in that I could like come up with those ideas and then work together to build that story because they had certain things they wanted to be in the story and I had certain things that I wanted to be in the story. And so I do feel like you need to be able to be collaborative in that way. And I say this as someone, so me personally, I have always said I don't think I would ever like co-write a book. Never co-write a book because I'm such a control freak that I just feel like I would not like it. Like I would be upset that I wasn't the one deciding how everything would go. And so that is the sort of person I am. But in this case, like I did work really well in that sort of collaborative spirit. I think it really depends on the sort of project and what it is and, you know, how that collaboration is happening. And so just kind of being open to that. But I wanted to mention that because I don't want people to be like, oh, well, I don't really have any interest in ever co-writing anything, so why would I be interested in that? I think it's that sort of collaborative spirit, similar, not the same, but similar to working on your original work with an editor. Like you are collaborating with your editor and they're going to have certain ideas and there is going to be a certain give and take in conversation about how the book is coming together. And at the end of the process, it's really, you've created something together, even if you are like the in print author. Another thing I wanted to mention is that in the past, I had really heard a lot about IP being something for like people that write fast. Like you gotta write fast to do IP. You have to be so fast to do this sort of thing because the timelines are very difficult and like short and that sort of thing. Whereas I found with this one, it was incredibly reasonable because it's a short book. It's a 35,000 word book. And I felt like I was given ample time to work on it. And I think it did come together quickly because this whole process pretty much was done in a year. Whereas like a traditional publishing schedule is usually for, you know, let's say middle grade or YA fantasies or sci-fi would usually be a couple years, but this was put together quite quickly, which I think is really a testament to the length of it as well. And so I wanted to talk about that because I feel like that was something I heard so much, was that you had to be fast. But I actually think a lot of authors could turn around something that's 35,000 words in a very reasonable time period. So I think depending on the project, you in fact wouldn't have to write as much as you would think. That being said, there are other IP projects which have much larger word counts, and that's like a whole separate thing. In that case, I'm like, yeah, you probably do need to be fast, especially if you have other contracted books on the way or like in progress. You probably will have to be fast in order to keep up with that demand. But this project I found to be very amendable. And so I feel like what I came away with, as in like, who is IP good for, is it so depends. And I think early in my career, I didn't think that I would be doing IP because I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't have time for that. I want to write my own stories. But I feel like you never know until an opportunity comes up. Like this had come up, and certainly I would have never thought I would be writing a He-Man book. But the opportunity came up and everything kind of worked together. And I was like, oh, actually, this is very doable for me. And I'm very interested in doing this. And so I do think it's worth it to tell, you know, if you've got an agent, to tell them that you are open to IP, just to see what comes through, because you don't have to say yes to this stuff. It's really just like so that, you know, maybe your agent will be like, oh, hey, yeah, you know, there might be interest in this IP project, or just kind of like, just to put feelers out there to be like, hey, I might be interested in this. Let's kind of see what comes through. And then you can see what comes and kind of be like, no, I'm not interested in this. Or like, oh, actually, maybe I'm interested in this. I really think you might be surprised by what comes in and what you may or may not be surprised about or interested in. Mind you, there's a whole other bunch of things to go along with that, such as like, you know, certain IP projects will have different parameters and like might be set up differently. Sometimes you might not get royalties, or sometimes you might, you know, get a certain sum of money and then they take it to a publisher and they sell it for way more, and that might be difficult for you. So there's a lot of different factors in that. But I think generally what I would say is it might be worth it for you to be open to IP and just kind of see what's out there. And finally, will I do more IP in the future? So for me personally, this is going to depend on three things, which is going to be time, interest, and scope. So I need to have time to work on an IP project. And I think something that I very much learned in 2022 is that I took on too many things and it made my time very compacted and compressed, and I didn't have much room for anything else. And I realized that that is not a state in which I like to be in, and I want to be in a state in which I have lots of extra time to work with and to build my life around and to be flexible with. And so for me, it would really depend on like, how much time do I have to do this, and is doing this, adding this to my time, going to make my time overall strained and compressed and gonna make me feel like I'm under pressure, because it's kind of a difference between like having time for something and like, I don't know, I can't even figure out how to say it, because sometimes you have time for something but you shouldn't do it, I guess is really what I'm saying. Sometimes you have time for something but it's gonna put you into a state that's too much. And so for me, I'm very considerate of my time and like whether I have the time in order to do something. And so that's really what I'm considering first and foremost. And then the next one is interest. I have to be interested in the IP that comes to me. So I have had some IP come to me that I've been like, I am not super interested in this, or I just like, I don't think this is for me. And so I haven't done those. And in the case of like He-Man, if I had watched the show and I hadn't liked it, I wouldn't have done it, because I just don't see me effectively writing a book having no interest in it, no interest in the subject matter at all. I don't think that's something kind of I would agree with. That being said, I do not begrudge people who do it. People need to get their coins. People need to live. You cannot eat I don't know, you can't eat creative stimulation. I don't know how to say it. So, you know, some people do IP and they may not be as interested in the project, but they need to make a living for themselves. And I do not begrudge that. I think that is totally fine. And I have no problem with that. I am personally in a positive position in which if I'm not interested in IP, I don't need to do it for my sake and for my livelihood. I have enough kind of other projects in order to do that. Will that always be the case? I don't know, but right now that's the case. And so that's a big part of like my consideration of IP. And then finally, scope. So this is the scope of the project. And so the great thing with this He-Man book is that even though that is a massive IP and a massive world, the scope of it was for this one show. And so I could focus in and I could know I'm just focusing on this one show. I wasn't having to do something with like such an enormous scope that I was gonna feel overwhelmed in trying to compact all of that into one story, or in trying to research all of that, or trying to learn about all of that. And so it was a very reasonable scope for me in terms of the IP itself, but also in terms of what I was going to be creating. So a 35,000 word book for me is incredibly like very, very doable, like very much something that I could do within a reasonable amount of time, and I felt would like not take absolutely everything out of me, like very, very reasonable. Versus I think if it was like something that was gonna be like 90,000 words, then I might think twice. I might kind of feel like, I don't know how much, again, it comes back to the time thing. Maybe if I have nothing else publishing that year, then of course, yeah, sure, I could absolutely do a 90,000 word novel. I probably was gonna do that anyway. But if I had other things I was working on and I was like, I do have enough time for something smaller scope and like this amount of words, but I don't necessarily have time for something this larger scope or this amount of words. And so those three things are really what contribute to me in whether I will be doing IP again. But in terms of like IP as like a baseline and just like interest in intellectual property, I continue to have interest in it. I actually would say now, in fact, I have way more interest in doing IP because I had a really positive experience and I was like, oh, that was great. Like I would absolutely be interested in doing other IP in the future. And there are some properties that I'm like, oh, like that's pretty cool. Like I would love to do a book for that. And so I feel like now, even more than ever, I'm open to IP. It's just kind of those parameters of like, do I have that? Do I have the time and the scope? And what's in the interest? I was like, what's that second thing I said? So I think that's what will all contribute to whether I'll do IP again. And that's it for this video. I hope this was interesting for you, hearing more about that He-Man book process and IP and like working on that and what that was like. These are the sort of some things that I'm curious about, and so that's why I wanted to make this video. And if you are interested in reading my upcoming book, Lost in the Void, the third Tales of Eternia series book, again, I will have links down below. It comes out June 6th, and I think it's a fun time. I think it's a very fun time. I also think you should check out the other books in the He-Man series, which are also a fun time, and I have all of those linked down below. And if you have any other questions for me, put them in the comments and I will answer to the best of my ability. If there's anything that's like confidential. I can't actually say. I'll just say so because, you know, contracts and NDAs, the contents of them are confidential in my case, and so I may not be able to say certain things, but I will answer to the best of my ability, as I said. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!